had streaks of violence, put it that way. And so I had this internal rage always going on, and anything that would trigger it, I'd just vent. And you factor in the drugs and the drinking. When I started I think I started drinking when I was in elementary school. I didn't really care anymore about who I hurt. I was walking, and I remember talking to the stars, because I didn't know God personally, had no idea. I just figured, hey, somebody's up there, right? So I just started making a deal with God. I said, God, if you're real, I'm kind of sick of this life. But I didn't realize that God heard that prayer. So as messed up as I was and as broken as I was, God was attentive to that prayer.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Light It Up podcast. I'm your host, Wyatt. With us today, we have Rafael Alvarez.
What's up, y'all?
And our guest today, Evangelist Mike Gomez.
So,
today, Evangelist Mike Gomez is going to be sharing his testimony. Incredible story, powerful work of God. I recently heard his testimony on another podcast and was absolutely riveted by it. And we had the opportunity soon after to have a revival with him, and I got to know Evangelist Mike Gomez pretty well. And so we were able to invite him on the podcast. Thank you, Pastor, for coming on. It's a pleasure. So we're going to be going through Evangelist Mike Gomez's testimony. He's going to be sharing stories, things he's learned, things that you can apply to your own life. We'll just be asking questions along the way. So enjoy this. Pastor, why don't you take it away?
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. My name is Mike Gomez. I got saved July 24th, 1988. And so that might seem like a long time ago for some of you young folks, but I was a broken man by the time I was 24. I actually thought I'd be dead by the time I was 25. I lived my life like that. I didn't really care anymore. And so I kind of accelerated my destruction path after I got out of the Marine Corps. I enlisted when I was 17. My mom signed a waiver so I could go to the Marines because I didn't want to. Part of the reason I joined the Marines is, number one, is that, in my opinion, and I'm sticking to it, they're the best military force in the world, but like I said, that's my opinion. And so I also wanted to kind of bring some dignity to my name, because I grew up in a home that was dysfunctional, to say the least. My dad left when I was 6 years old, and so I grew up to hate my father, because a lot of times my mom would say things to me about my life, and it was always when I was going through a struggle or having doing something stupid, passed out on the lawn, in jail, whatever the case might be. She would always connect the dots between me and my father. She would say things like, "You're just like your dad." And so I back then, I just thought it was, everything ugly about my life had to do with him. So I grew up to really kind of despise him, whether I knew him or not. That was a whole other story. It was my way of venting. And because I was such a hurt person, because of that rejection, I grew up very, I had streaks of violence, put it that way. And so I had this internal rage always going on, and anything that would trigger it, I'd just vent. And you factor in the drugs and the drinking. When I started I think I started drinking when I was in elementary school, sampling things, and it didn't take much to get drunk, at that age. And then that escalated into my junior high years. And so by that time I was already dabbling with, marijuana, cigarettes, and then, started dabbling with pills, various forms of speed and different things like that. And, by the time I was in high school, I was already, I had already done a lot of drugs. Marijuana was the least of them. I had done, hallucinogens, uppers, downers, acid, you name it. PCP. I was doing all kinds of things in high school, and I was already a drunk, so I drank all the time. We'd go to high school parties, and I'd find my way to the keg, and basically sat there until it was all gone, and basically drank myself stupid. And because I was drinking, a lot of times, things would escalate in that kind of climate, and so I always found myself either fighting or in
Very
some kind of
violent.
trouble. Yeah, so it would come out. So I entered the Marine Corps to try and change that, and that just made things. It has, elevated my anger and my rage. Not that I enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps, but didn't last too long because I did have violent streaks and things like that. So once I got in the Marine Corps, I was almost 20 years old, and so I basically pushed the pedal to the metal on my sin life. Went back to what I was doing, started dealing drugs. I was always a functional sinner, I guess you can say it. I was out on the streets, not that I wasn't far from it, but I was able to hold down jobs because I've been working all my life, and so it was just something I did. But I was able to function as a, druggie and drunk on the job. I don't know if that was good or bad. It was just part of my life. I always worked, and so, but I didn't really care anymore about who I hurt. I had no more natural affections like for my relatives, and we weren't very close. And my sin and all of our sin just kind of drove us apart. And so I don't even remember really ever going to church as a child, or or I remember going to church once in boot camp because that was the day that the drill instructors would leave us alone. So it was kind of like you just go there and fall asleep or whatever. But it was our hour or two that we can just get away from the drill instructors. Otherwise, we just had to stay in the barracks and clean weapons and clean up the barracks. And I tried going. I don't remember any message whatsoever what was spoken on my dog tags. We all have dog tags given to us in the military. It's a way of identifying who you are in case you lose your life in a combat situation. And they ask you. It'll have your name, rank, serial number, and your religious preference on there, and your blood type. And so on my religious preference, it said no preference. So I was, had no affiliation with any kind of religion. So my dog tag said, it's engraved in that little plate, says, no preference. I had no religious upbringing or background. So, that's where I came from. And so I remember one time I was working construction. I used to do heavy construction, building bridges and underground, things like this. And there was one of the jobs I used to, because I worked so hard in one of them, they kept me on with the company. And so it was an easier job. I was working on the beach of San Clemente. We were putting in a pump station, a sewer pump station. And so it was really easy for me. I normally do concrete. And so it was a real kickback compared to other stuff. And so, but I would, our daily routine there during that job was about a 9-month job that I was on that particular job. But every day we'd go down to the liquor store. They made big fat burritos. I'd get me a burrito, big tall can of beer.
Amazing. Not
And
the
then
beer ball, but the burrito.
go down to the beach. I wolf down the burrito in about 2-3 bites, and then swash down my beer. And then my lunch break was half an hour. So, and then I'd go and smoke a joint, do a line of methamphetamines, and go back to work. But one particular day, this apprentice carpenter that was working with us, I knew him from another job. There were about 4 of us would go down and do this same thing. We'd all eat lunch together. He gave me a track. I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen anything. It looked like a little cartoon book to me. But he just gave me the track, and I took it and I looked at it, and I didn't really know what it was. And so I just kind of tore a page out of it, gave him the book back, rolled it up, and used it for a straw to do my line. Did my drugs with it, and then I just, and he just was kind of shocked. And so we went back to work. And then, that was, I think, one attempt to be witnessed to prior to my salvation. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a track, and that was about it. Because, I was a little crazy back then, so it wasn't like I was very approachable. It wasn't like I was one of those guys that you could easily come and say, hey, man, I want to tell you about Jesus. I was pretty standoffish and pretty rude and sarcastic and mean and all that other stuff.
So,
But I was a broken man. I was a hurt man. I didn't want people to see that side of me, so I would drink a lot. And I remember one time I was this is after my father came back into my life. You might have heard this testimony, Wyatt, on the other one. But I was visiting my mom. And so my mom, she lives in Fontana where I grew up. And so I went to just go say hi. And this is before cell phones and all that other stuff. And so she starts ranting about, how my father would be back when we were all grown up. So I'm 24 at the time. My brother's he's the youngest. He's now 18. So she's going, I knew he'd be back when you guys were all grown up, blah, blah, blah. And, and I'm asking her, what are you talking about? And she says, well, your dad, he came back. I says, whatever. It didn't matter to me, because I already had all this rage against him anyways. And so I had, it wasn't like I was looking for him. But while I was there, the phone rang and she answered it. And then she said it was for me. So I was kind of bewildered as to why somebody's calling, how they know I was there, So I went to the, phone and picked it up. And on the other end of the phone was this voice that said, hello, son. And I'm like, who is this?
Wow.
And he goes, I'm your father. And I told him, I said, I don't have a father, man. I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, well, it's me. And he told me his name. I said, yeah, okay, whatever. And he says, I'd really like to talk to you. And so part of me was like, I don't want to talk to you, man. I want nothing to do with you. But the other side of me, the broken side of me that, I didn't let nobody see was there. Maybe that little 6-year-old boy was like, yeah, I'd like to know why he left, left us hanging like this. But I didn't share it with nobody. And so I just said, listen, if you really want to talk to me, man, I says, I'll make a deal with you. I says, you just buy me a 12-pack of beer and I'll hear you out. And when the beer's over, that's the end of your time, And so I had already kind of worked up in my own head prior to this engagement that if I ever meet my dad, I'm going to kill him, because I thought he was my problem. I thought he was the reason I was such a messed up person. So I pick him up. He buys me the 12-pack and I take him up. I had a 4-wheel drive at the time. Took him up to these little hills and he's sitting next to me, talking and trying to, break the ice, with his son that he hasn't ever been around, for 20, some years. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever, and then I'm just pounding the beers. And he sounded like, best way I could describe it was Charlie Brown's teacher. I don't know if you guys ever seen the Peanuts, but
yeah,
it was just blah, 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 blah. I wasn't paying attention to what word he was saying. I was actually thinking, should I off him right here? Should I kill him and just leave him here out here in these hills? And I was contemplating that. And so I'm slamming these beers. And so I don't know how long he talked, 20, 30 minutes. It didn't take me long back then to, drink beer. I could go through a 12-pack pretty quick. And so I was about 3/4 away, probably had about 3-4 beers left. And I looked at him and said, listen, man, and I told him to his face, because if I was going to talk to you, express my feelings to you back then, I still kind of am like that. But I told him, I say, listen, dude, I says, if you would have been here last year, I would have killed you. I said, but right now, I don't really give a flying beep about you, so now that you said your piece, you can get on with your life. I really don't want to see you again. So you can be gone. I don't care. I don't care about you. I don't care about nothing. So dropped him off. And, that same year, I was at a bar, miserable. And, at this particular bar, I frequented, it was a local bar for all the people that grew up where I lived, So a lot of local guys. It was it was a pretty rowdy place. They had asked me one time to be a bouncer there. I said, nah, man, I don't want to do all that. I'd rather drink, But anyways, I was there and I remember leaving that place at night. I actually left my truck there and I walked home. And it was about a 1.5 mile walk. So I just, I didn't want to get a drunk driving. So and then I was just miserable. So I was walking. And I remember talking to the stars, because I didn't know God personally, had no idea. I just figured, hey, somebody's up there, right? So I just started making a deal with God. I said, God, if you're real, I'm kind of sick of this life. There's got to be more to than this. By this time, I was burnt out. My reputation, that I had, and I'm not claiming to be all big and bad or anything like that, but there was few of us in that city that had developed some reputations as far as fighting goes. So I was kind of one of those guys, and I was burnt out. I was burnt out of having to, here's another guy wants to, test me, check me, And so I was like, I always oblige. I never back down. But, I was burnt out of it. I was like, man, I'm so done with this. Been doing this for too long. It's like, and so I'm talking to guys. Okay, God, maybe I need to go to church, or I don't know. Maybe I need a woman to settle down with. I don't something. But I didn't realize that God heard that prayer. So as messed up as I was and as broken as I was, God was attentive to that prayer. So that you can throw this out to any of your friends, your classmates, whatever, your neighbors. That God is always going to be attentive to an ear that is broken. And so I'm sitting there, I walked home, didn't even think of nothing about it. And it wasn't but a few months later that I met another broken person, a young lady. And it was strange how we met. One of my friends that I knew, he invited me over this place, and, he was actually trying to scab on her, trying to pick up on her. He said, you just come on over, man, we party. And, this one girl he basically said he was trying to make her his girlfriend. So I said, well, whatever, I'll come over and hang out. So I went there and and nothing really developed. We kind of did some drugs and sort of some drinking, and then I kind of left about 10 o'clock at night, went to this other bar. I was at their house, went to a bar and closed the bar down like I usually did, left about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm all wired up on speed still. So I'm like, man, I might as well go back and see if they're awake, because I know they were doing speed with me. So I went, they were still awake playing cards. And so I went in there, and then just having conversation with, my friend and these two girls. And we're just shooting a breeze. And about that, by the time it was getting daybreak, sun was coming up. And so, the liquor store's open at 6. So I just said, hey, man, I'm going to go get me some beer. I'm still wide awake. And, so anybody want to go to the store? And this girl, her name's Valerie, she said, I'll go. So she went and freshened up, and, we went to the store together. I started talking to her, we kind of hit it off. Actually, we became, girlfriend and boyfriend, actually, within a couple of weeks, started hanging out, I'm like, hey. And so she told me one time, we were sitting in her apartment. So I'm trying to avoid all the people that I hung around with, just because I'm saying maybe I need to get a girlfriend. So I'm talking to her, and we'd be up for a couple of days, right? Because she liked speed, she would, she didn't smoke weed or drink, but she liked that hyper feeling that speed gave her. And so we'd be up for a couple of days. All of a sudden she'd start witnessing to me, telling me about Jesus and telling me I need to get saved. And I'm looking at her.
And where did this come from? Did she grow up in a?
Well, she had a little Pentecostal grandmother. We found this out later.
A Pentecostal grandmother.
Yeah, that used to take her to church when she was younger, and she was, she remembers that, all stuck with her, those little seeds planted in her. And so, but, her mom, her mother was a crazy hippie, hung around bikers. My girlfriend grew up for bikers, had their Harley Davidson in the house, and so, she was doing methamphetamines at an early age too, 14 years old, broken, got pregnant, and so she got married to this guy, and then he was abusive, tried to beat her to death. And so she said, I want another. So this is when I found her, when we met, she was trying to run from this guy. And so I met her. So we started hanging out. Actually, her husband came over one day while I was there, and, I thought we were going to have to settle some issues, but, but he didn't want to go there. Like I said, I think my reputation preceded me.
What did he just ended up leaving?
Yeah, he left.
Oh, wow.
He left. he realized he wasn't welcome there, so he took off. And so, my girlfriend, and I were sitting there one time on her balcony, and she makes this comment, which I thought was it was different. She told me, she goes, I've never met anybody, and granted, now she's been around druggies and drinkers all her life, right? She goes, I've never met anybody that can smoke as much weed and drink as much beer as you do. It's the old conversation. She's telling me that. And I just looked at her and I said,
Lots of
well,
experience.
I go, I've got a lot of practice. I just told her, I said, I've been doing this, my whole life,
Wow.
And so, so like I said, she would break out her Bible from time to time. One particular incident, I'll never forget it, because this is where I really, people ask me when I felt called to preach. I didn't realize it at the time, but I can point to this particular moment, because we were up for a couple of days. I'm trying to crash out. I'm trying to just go to sleep, but, and she's got her Bible open and she's preaching to me and reading scriptures and telling me I need to get saved. I'm like, whatever. I just want to go to sleep. And so she's trying to say, you need to pray with me, So she convinced me to say a prayer of repentance with her, So I'm just following suit what she's saying. I'm repeating what she's saying, And then we got to a point, and I'll never forget this, She says, okay, now say in Jesus' name. And I couldn't say Jesus. I couldn't utter that name because, the stuff I've been involved in, the drugs and the music and stuff. I actually had like images of 666 in my head. I was she was freaking out. She's like, oh my gosh, is this guy a devil or what? Because I couldn't even say that name, Jesus.
Wow.
I couldn't come out of my mouth. So she's freaking out, and she's like begging me, you got to say Jesus, you got to. And so finally I did. I said, oh, Jesus, man. And something snapped. It was like, like I got up, I grabbed her Bible, we had this walk-in closet / restroom with a little studio apartment, sat down there and began to read the Bible for the first time in my life. And God spoke to me.
How old were you?
Whoa.
How old was I?
Yes.
I was 24.
Oh, wow. So it's the same. Okay.
Yeah, same year. It's all happened in the same year.
Wow.
And so I'm reading, God's speaking to me. I don't know if I was in there about an hour or so. Time just flew by. But I came out, right? After I read the Bible, I came out and I told her, I said, listen, I says, we're going to go to church. We're going to stop having sex. I said, that prayer I just said, you need to pray it. And she looked at me like, what? I'm the one that told you. I said, I don't care, So I tell people I knew I was called to preach for the very first time I said a prayer.
Wow.
Because I was already trying to pull an altar call that day, And so, but that didn't last long. Okay. By this time it's, May of 88 or so. Didn't last long. We didn't have, any church to go to. No, no religious affiliation. So that experience kind of withered away real quick for me. And she also had a supernatural spiritual encounter as well. A few days later, like God was trying to get a hold of both our lives. But at the same time, so was the devil. I tell people during that span between the time I prayed with her and the time I actually walked into church, probably a couple months, but, I was being tormented. I was hearing voices. I was hearing, listen to regular music. All of a sudden, bam, I hear the voice of like, hail Satan. In my head, it was freaking me out. I'm like, turn around and ask her, did you hear that? She's like, no, she thought I was tripping, on drugs or something. I'm like, no, I heard it clear as day, man. And, and I actually threw the tape away. I said, man, that freaked me out. I was like, what the heck? But we started getting paranoid and, we started having more arguments. There was a lot of tension in our life, And then one day, in July, and we'd been up, I took her out for her birthday, She just turned 21, so she's now legal to go to a nightclub. So I took her out to a nightclub. She liked to dance. I like to drink. So we went out Thursday night, we're partying, drinking, I'm drinking and doing all the drugs. And, so we're up the next day, Friday, can't sleep because we've been on drugs. And so Friday night, so well, might as well go to another club. So I went out and partied at another club. Same thing Saturday. Saturday rolls around, we're still awake. You know, I said, well, we might as well go hit another club. So one more time, went out Saturday night. And so, you know, Sunday rolls around, we're back at the apartment. And, you know, usually after 3 days of me being awake, I can't go past that, you know, back then, because I'd start getting really strange. And, you know, I can't explain it to you. It's, you know, I don't suggest you experience it, but, you know, I was tweaking, you know, you start hearing things and seeing things. And I just want to go to sleep. You know, my body's burnt out because, you know, I've been up for 3 days, you know, physically tired. And so I said, I'm just trying to crash out. So it's morning, you know, and then my sister comes over. My sister, she had just recently gave her life to Christ around May.
Wow.
At the Door Christian Fellowship in Colton. And so I didn't know she had this encounter. She had a supernatural conversion as well. And so she comes over and she's just got that little glow on her, you know, she's all excited. So I'm sitting over there on the couch, you know, just getting high and drinking and trying to just crash out. But my girlfriend's totally engaged in this conversation because this is in her already. She already wants that. She wants, you know, she's been talking about it for all the time I've known her. And so they're talking, and then, you know, they're talking about a movie that night. And so I'm like, and so they both turn to me. They start tagging me. Come on, it's just a movie, you know. You want to, because it's a movie. I said, all right, well, if she wants to go to a movie, all right. I said, okay. So I committed to go to a movie that night for the church. And so then my sister leaves, and so I'm getting very burnt out. I'm ready to go to sleep for probably good 20 hours or so. And then I see my girlfriend starting to get dressed. You know, by this time it's, you know, evening. She's getting ready, and I say, hey, where are you going? She says, I'm going to church. Are we going? And I go, oh, I totally forgot about it, you know.
Now,
and so
your sister, how was her life prior to her getting saved? Was it similar to what you were?
Yeah, broken, hurting, you know, got pregnant, you know, and I think right after high school or during high school or senior year. Wow. I actually got my sister high. I think you heard that testimony.
Yeah.
You know, before I left the Marine Corps. And so she, you know, she was a rowdy chick. You know, she was one with, you know, getting fights with other girls. And one of the things is the girl that witnessed her was the girl that she hated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she's actually led her to Christ. You know?
Wow.
And so God used that girl to, you know, this girl is a cheerleader, blah, blah. My sister's just, you know, she's a stoner, crazy person like me, you know. And so, but anyways, so.
Yes, continue.
Yeah, I went to, she's getting ready for church. I'm like, well, I can't go to church like this, man. It's, you know, this is, I'm burnt out. So I went to the room and, you know, I had drugs. I used to deal drugs. And so I had a bunch of meth, and I did me a big old fat line, you know. So instantly I kicked in the high gear, everything I've been doing for the last 3 days. So once again, my brain starts, you know, going 100 miles an hour. And I'm like, oh, man, I can't go to church like this, you know. Not that I knew how to go to church, but I went and I rolled me a big fat joint, smoked a joint, kind of calmed down a little bit. And so I said, all right, reached in the refrigerator, grabbed me a cold brew. So, all right, let's go to church. And so I walked out the door as I was. I had my flip-flops on. I had cut off shorts. I had a Corona tank top on and marijuana earring on and long hair, and went to church with drugs in my pocket. You know, I took some speed with me. I had a bag of weed and some speed. And so, my thinking, you never know who you might run into. You might party or something, you know. So, you know, I don't know what's going on at church. I've never been to church. So we get into the church service, and, you know, we're there singing song service, and my girlfriend's got tears coming down her eyes, you know. And so I look over and I'm like, what's your trip, you know? She's, you know, I go, why are you crying, man? I brought you to church, you know? And she's like, this is something I always wanted. And I'm looking around like, I don't even know what she's talking about. You know, like, what, you know? And so, you know, they sat down after that and we watched the movie. I've told people it was the dumbest Christian movie I've ever seen in my life, you know? It was people talking about drugs, and they don't do drugs, and they used to do drugs. So I'm watching this. I'm on drugs, right? I got drugs in my pocket. And I'm thinking, well, you guys want to know about drugs? I got drugs at home. I got drugs on me. I'll tell you about drugs. You want to know? You want us? I'll give you some. You want some? You know, That's what I'm thinking. And then they got up and started, pulling the altar call after the movie. My pastor's pulling the altar call. I didn't know who he was at the time. He starts preaching and challenge people to get saved. Raise your hand if you're a sinner. My girlfriend's hand goes up. Raise your hand if you're backsliding. Her hand goes up again. I kind of teased her. I said she almost dove to the altar. She wanted God.
Wow.
And so when she's up there praying, I'm there in this church. I'm just kind of looking around like I ain't raising my hand for nothing. So I got up and I walked to the back of the room, the back of the building. And I gave off the signal, to people to let them know, don't talk to me. The international signal of, I don't want to be messed with. And in case you're wondering, is this, So I'm in your church, right? I'm on drugs. I got my arms folded. I'm in the back and I got an attitude and I look like I'm crazy. I smell like I'm crazy. And so I see my sister over there talking to some dude in the corner, kind of chewing on his ear. I figured it out later. She was saying, go talk to my brother because he comes up right after that. He was little homeboy, little cholo who had gotten saved. And he comes up to me and goes, hey, Holmes, you ever hear about Jesus? And I cussed at him in church. I said, F you, punk, man, get on my face, dude. Because I'm going to knock you out. You keep talking to me, And it freaked him out, man. He's like, in church? I said, yeah, it don't matter where I'm at, bro. You know what I'm saying? I'm down. And so he walked away, and then another dude walked up and I'm like, and I'm trying to figure out who he is, right? Because he's got this face that looked familiar to me. And so I start talking to him. So I wasn't as rude to him because I'm trying to figure out, do I know this dude? And then what it was is I knew his older brother and they looked a lot alike. So I'm like, so once I figured out who he was, I was like, oh, okay, I know your brother, blah, blah, blah. And he asked me if I wanted to pray. I said, nah, man, I don't want to pray, And right around that time, the pastor said, you're here because God brought you here. And it was like everything stopped. All of a sudden I'm like I felt like I was the only one in the building. Like, whoa. I'm starting to think, man, I'm in church. I don't go to church, man. I don't know anybody here except for my girlfriend and my sister. How would they know? They didn't tell them, how does God know I'm here? Anyway, kept pulling the altar call. I think I was the last person to respond to that altar call, and he kept pleading, come to the cross, man. Jesus loves you, died on you. And so finally I walked over to the guy that I kind of recognized and I tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, man, I'll pray. And he was kind of surprised. He's like, really? I said, yeah, but I don't know how to pray, man. And so he took me to the altar and I just said what he said. And it was one of those glorious, ugly salvations, embarrassing, because I'm there at the altar weeping, just all this brokenness that I had in me just coming out, and felt the love of God touch me. I'm just like, man, and I'm just, I'm overwhelmed by how I was feeling, like this big burden come off me. And then, then the pastor says, hey, well, we want to pray for deliverance for anybody who wants to stop doing drugs, And the guy that was next to me, he goes, you want to get delivered? I don't know what you're talking about, dude. I use the term Christianese, but that's a phrase I developed later. I don't speak this Christian language, man. Delivered? What are you talking about, delivered? What's that mean? He says, you want to stop doing drugs? Yeah, dude, I hate man. I do it all the time. I do it every day. I hate it. I hate the way it makes my body feel. I hate it, but I just do it because I drink every day and I smoke weed and everything else every day. And so I just do that so I can stay up. Yeah, I'd like to stop. So I stood up. There's about 10 of us at the altar call, including my girlfriend. And so then they came, pastors praying for people. And when he laid hands on me, I've never been in church. I didn't know what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. I didn't know. I just remember when he touched my head, when he laid his hand on me, I fell by the power of the Holy Ghost. I fell back and I'm like, whoa, man, I'm looking at the ceiling now. And my first response was to clench my fist and like, who just hit me? And who pushed me?
Wow.
But I'm completely sober and in my right mind. All the drugs were just, being up for 3 days, gone. I'm clear-headed. Like, whoa, what happened? And the guy that prayed to me goes, man, God just touched your life. I'm like, and then, it was kind of like a haze for a moment. I got up and I made my way to my girlfriend, and we're kind of looking at each other like, whoa, man, God just touched us and saved us. I remember talking to a few people before I walked out of the church. I said, hey, man, you guys got church tomorrow? I said, I got to come back, because, this was just a Sunday night. It wasn't no revival, no nothing. It was just a regular Sunday night service, and I went to the parking lot, and in the parking lot, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my bag of weed and threw it in the parking lot. Reached into my wallet, pulled out my bag of speed, and my girlfriend said, hey, what are you doing? I said, don't worry about it. And I tossed that too. And then we got in our car and went back to home. It was about a 15-minute drive, 20-minute drive to Fontana where we lived. And went up to my apartment, and I made a beeline right to my room that had all the drugs and flushed it down the toilet, all my drugs down the toilet, broke my scales, the stuff I used to use for dealing, and took all my pipes, bongs, and I crushed them and broke them and threw them in the trash can. Broke all my, all kinds of stuff that I had, paraphernalia all over the place. And then me and my girlfriend decided that night, I said, hey, we can't be living like this. And so I went from the bedroom to the couch without even knowing what fornication was. I just knew the way I'm living ain't right. So, we started to make decisions right then, and eventually one of the brothers in the Colton church reached out and said, hey, man, I got an extra room. You want to move in? I took advantage of it, And so I moved in with him, and my girlfriend used to sit on one side of the church, and I sat on the other. Nobody told us to do that. Nobody didn't even hear a sermon on it. We just decided, hey, we're going to live for God. And bought me a big Bible, because I didn't have one. So I went out and bought me a Bible because I wanted to know this God that changed me. So I started reading my Bible, and I would call my girlfriend and say, hey, what do you read? And we compare notes, I'm reading this. And so eventually we, about a year or so later, I started to court her. And then we eventually got married. I got married in 91. We've been married 33 years now.
Wow.
Actually, this is my first time actually hearing a testimony, like in the full length of it. Like, dude, it's
a miracle.
Yeah.
I used to witness to people like that. It's like, they brush me off and say, man, I don't believe God. I said, would you believe God if you saw a miracle? So, yeah, if I see a miracle, I'll believe God. I said, all right, are you ready? I'll show you one. They say, yeah. So you ready? Are you sure? They go, yeah, show me. I said, you're looking at one. I'm a miracle, man. It's like, Jesus did to me what the Marine Corps couldn't do, what judge couldn't do, what jail couldn't do, programs couldn't do. I said, he changed my life. That's a miracle.
Wow. Amen. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you want to hear the rest of the pastor's story, make sure you tune in next week, Saturday at 8 a.m. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube and Instagram. All of those to stay connected and to stay updated and to hear when this episode comes out. Stay tuned. We'll see you guys next week.